In this video, I want to take you through a back-end tour of my Google Drive, how I organize all of my files, and how I keep everything organized by learning outcome. So if you're new here, my name is Rachel, and I teach using systems of mastery-based learning. What I'm trying to do here on this channel is just talk about all of the systems I have in place in my classroom to keep myself organized and also to help my students learn better. So why don't we just jump right into my Google Drive and I'll talk about what I do, how I organize things, and why I do things the way I do. All right, so let's jump right in here. Okay, so sort of starting off in my Google Drive, I love using Google Drive because, well, my district or school board uses Google as its primary sort of system. So that's where I live in terms of doing everything Google. Now, I like to set up my Google Drives by course. And so I will typically call my folder the course code that we use for that particular course. And then I will set up folders based on learning outcomes. So I think in another video, I'll talk about my learning outcomes in more detail. But essentially, what I do is I divide my courses down into around 16 learning outcomes for a semestered course. And those are focused on key core content concepts that students need to learn throughout that course. And so everything I build around those particular learning outcomes is all geared towards the assessment of those learning outcomes. And then all of my grading architecture goes with it too. So I'm getting kind of like way off track here. We'll talk about that in another video. Let me know in the comments below if you want to see that video. Okay, so in terms of my sort of order I set things up here, like I said, I have it divided out by learning outcomes. So for example, my learning outcome 1 in this particular course is all about inorganic nomenclature, or how to name different chemical compounds. Okay. And then if we kind of go back, my learning outcome 2 is all about chemical reactions. So some of the basics of chemical reactions and so on and so forth. Now within each Google Drive folder, I have all of the different lessons numbered based on a specific naming convention. So I like to use the number of the learning outcome as my first number, and then the second number, the one that goes after the period, goes based on the order or sequence of that particular lesson or the materials that go with that lesson. So that makes things very structured in terms of my Google Drive folder here. You can see everything for 2.1 comes first, and then 2.2, 2.3, and 2.4. So it makes things really easy for me to find. Now, in terms of my lessons, I always set them up in Google Slides. I always use the same particular template set of slides for each of my lessons. If you want to, I have a video. I've got a couple of videos actually talking about those, and I'll link those in the description below if you'd like to go check those out. So my base lessons are kind of set out in Google Slides, which is really useful here. And then any of the sort of things that go with that particular lesson are also listed with that 2.1 or whatever it is. I also create little mastery checks that go with each lesson. And I can talk about that again, that structure in another video below, or another video another time. Again, let me know if you want to see that and hear about all my mastery check sort of structures. Now, within a learning outcome folder, I also will have a folder for all my evaluations that are aligned with that learning outcome. So I run a checkpoint style type of evaluation system in my classroom, and I have different versions of those checkpoints, and I kind of cycle through a variety of them. I usually end up creating new ones each semester, at least tweaking them so that I have a variety, because I give these back to students and I know they're floating around. And so I do like to create different versions of those. And then I also have a folder for more whole group kind of instruction types of activities. So usually at the beginning of my class, we'll start out with some sort of activity on whiteboards, kind of thinking classroom style, but not really in terms of, the philosophy that goes along with thinking classrooms. But just some sort of review questions that have students thinking about the lessons that they're working on and practicing those skills with other groups or with other students collaboratively. Now, in terms of my Google Drive as well, I also have another sort of couple of places that I like to keep organized here. My first one is my administrative folder, and this is sort of like all the administrative or big picture, long-term planning kinds of documents kind of go in here. So if I go in here, I can show you, like, for this course, I usually have my course syllabus in here. I have additional course information that I like to post that goes along with my course syllabus. I will also have my grading architecture documents in here. Lots of sort of policy kind of documents. The schedule that I run my learning outcomes on in terms of checkpoints is also in here. And I just update these documents each semester so that they're ready to go for students to use. But the one that I want to talk about here is my long range plans. So the long range plans document is something that I create for each semester that has everything in sort of a one-stop shop for me in terms of a hub for all of my different documents. So I have all of my lessons organized in the folders, but then when I create this document in my semester planner, which going year to year, it's pretty easy to tweak once I have one already built out, then I can just kind of come in here and grab the links and post them to my learning management system if I need to, or any of those intro kind of activities. I can just come in here and grab the link, open the link up quickly, and get the students going in terms of what they're working on. Now, I really like this because it keeps me super organized. It keeps everything here. And now that Google Docs has the document tabs kind of structure, it just allows me to have everything all in one place. So I not only have my planning document in terms of my calendar for my students, I also have a document with all my learning outcomes, with all the student friendly kind of language that those learning outcomes are in. I also have previous semesters in here, so I can go back and see what I've done in previous semesters. And then my lab assessments, I also include different learning outcomes there and different sort of checklists and how I assess those. So I have those, as well as all my grade conversions, which, like I said, I could talk about in another document, but I have everything all in one place in this document, so it makes things very easy for me to be able to plan that. Now, in terms of taking this structure and presenting it for my students in my learning management system, I typically use Brightspace by D2L. I don't actually have it available on this Google account here, though, because this is my personal account. So I've set up a Google Classroom here with a very sort of similar structure with how I would set up my Brightspace. And this is really nice because this could map onto really any learning management system. Is I will take my learning outcomes and I'll create in Google Classroom, I create a topic. Okay, so I might, if I'm creating a new one, I might call this LO3. And then I could also say that this one is on uncertainties and significant digits. And then I'll add the topic. I like to have my more recent learning outcomes show up towards the top of the page so it's easier for students to find. And then I also like to include, actually, let's maybe delete this one because we don't need that. I like to include a course materials at the top of my Google Classroom or my Brightspace or whatever learning management system, and then post all the important documents in here. So this is where I would put my course syllabus, where I would put my grading architecture for students to reference, where I would put my progress tracker for students to be able to access all of those things readily. Now, within a learning outcome, I like to include my different lessons. So I'll make, for example, a material for each lesson, or I could make it an assignment too if I wanted to. It doesn't really matter. And I keep it very simple. I use the same sort of naming architecture that I do in my folders so that I can go back and easily reference things and find things very easily. So, for example, in LO1, there are 4 lessons. I have lesson 1.1, and I just link the slides in there. So, all students are doing is clicking on the slides and they have access to everything else within that lesson that they are using then. And then underneath lesson 1.2, again, just a single link to that slide deck. And so I find that this sort of system makes things very clean, very easy for students to navigate and be able to find all of the resources they need to very quickly. Now, what I really love about this system and using this system of Google Drive with my long range plans, with my learning management system, is everything is clearly numbered, everything's clearly labeled. Everything's clearly labeled not only for me, and it makes it easy for me to find, but also for my students to find, especially if, for example, they need to reassess one of the learning outcomes. They know exactly where to go back and revisit those particular lessons for that learning outcome. And so it makes it really clear and transparent for my students to know exactly what they need to know for each of the learning outcomes that they're being assessed on. So that was a really quick overview and kind of a, I guess maybe a deep dive, but not super deep dive, but just how I organize my Google Drive and how I keep everything aligned within my mastery-based system. That's it for this video. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you in the next one.